goody goody because I love the feast and I love to eat, right? And here in America, who doesn't love to eat and who doesn't love a feast? We seem to look for all kind of opportunities and times, whether it be birthdays or weddings or Super Bowls or whatever, to have a time of feasting and fellowshipping. Well, the people of Israel weren't too different. They enjoyed feasting and they enjoyed the gladness of it and the fun of it. They enjoyed it at weddings and they enjoyed it at birthdays and they enjoyed it when the family got together. They loved to have feasts, but there were certain feasts that were dictated by the Old Testament law as a part of religious observance and worship. Matter of fact, what we're going to do is we're going to break this down. And like I said, it's going to take us a couple weeks now, but ultimately we're going to look at the mandatory feast of Israel, those feasts in which they were mandated, right, especially all the males, to come together and observe this feast. So we're going to look at the mandatories, and you will see those three on our board: the Passover, Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. You also notice that several of these feasts have different names, and you'll notice that as we get into the scripture. We're also going to then look at some of the other feasts, as you see here: Feast of Trumpets, of Dedication, and Purim, as well as some periodical feasts or festivals such as the Sabbatical Year and Year of Jubilee. And we'll finish things up by looking at the Day of Atonement throughout our study here. You say, well, Brother Raines, that's pretty awesome, that's pretty amazing, but as we're looking at these things, we're New Testament Christians, right? We're New Testament Christians. We believe in grace and mercy, and this was the Old Testament law. Not only that, we're Gentiles, right? We're Gentiles. So if these feasts were given to the Old Testament people of Israel, then what difference does it make to us, and why should we even care what these feasts were and what they symbolize, and what difference does it make? Well, you're going to see as we get into these feasts and get into this study the tie-in to New Testament teaching. Because what you're going to see is that a lot of them are pointing to Jesus or pointing to an element of New Testament practice. And as they're pointing, also what you're going to need to notice and you'll be able to see is as you study the New Testament, and I wrote down just one example up here. For example, John chapter 7, right? As you're studying New Testament passages, when you have a fuller, deeper, richer understanding of these feasts, you'll understand why Jesus was acting or why Jesus was doing or why things were taking place as they were being told us in the New Testament. For example, in John chapter 7, and I have this, and so I'm just going to read a few verses. It says, after these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, for he would not walk in Jewry, because the Jews sought to kill him. Now the Feast of Tabernacles was at hand. His brethren therefore said unto him, depart hence and go into Judea, that thy disciples also may see the works that thou doest. So Feast of Tabernacles is at hand here in John chapter 7. It's the backdrop of this amazing episode in the ministry, in the person of Jesus Christ. His brethren are saying, listen, go leave Galilee, go down to Judea, observe the Feast of Tabernacles, make yourself known. But what Feast of Tabernacles? Why should they go to Jerusalem? What was this all about? Did Jesus really have to go? And was there going to be anybody there in the first place for him to reveal himself to? Well, like I said, a fuller, richer study of this will give us answers to that. Matter of fact, if you continue in that passage, and we're not going to look at much more, but just verse 14 says, now about the midst of the feast. Verse 37, in the last day, that great day of the feast, right? When you're reading these verses of scriptures in the New Testament, you're going, wait a minute, so what is the midpoint of the feast? Is this a 2-week feast? Is this a 3-week feast? Is this a 2-day feast? What is the midpoint of this feast? And why is the great day known as a great day of the feast? Well, like I said, as we get into this study, and as we look in each one of these feasts, you'll understand what the great day meant. You'll understand how many people were at these feasts. You'll understand why it was such a big deal for Jesus to go to these feasts. You'll understand why all the Jewish people looked to these feasts as important parts of their year and their life. So tonight, what we're going to do, so that we can begin this study like I think we probably need to, we're going to start looking at the very first feast. And like I said, Exodus 12, 1 through 20 is going to be our passage of Scripture. Now, we're going to read a lot of this together, so I'm going to ask you to help me to read. And as we're reading it, what we're going to do is we're going to basically fill out our board tonight. And we're going to give everybody the answers to what this feast actually meant, what did it entail, and what did it constitute. And because I don't want you to just sit here and hear what Brother Raines has to say or what Brother Raines has to think about this feast, we're going to look at Moses himself and what he wrote through the inspiration of God in Exodus chapter 12. As God gave him instruction and God gave him guidance about this first major important feast. Now remember, certain feasts are mandatory, right? Exodus 16 through 17, 3 times a year, all right, everybody recognize these feasts, and it gives them. First off, let's look at Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread. All right. Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 through 20. And let me flip over there real quick because I was in John. All right, there we go. Exodus chapter 12. I'm going to start us off. Well, I tell you what. Jim, you got that microphone. You start us off with verse 1 and 2, and then we'll pick it all back up together there.
And the Lord spoke unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you.
All right, Jim, thank you. As Jim was reading that verse of Scripture and that passage of Scripture, first of all, we need to get the context right. The people of Israel have been in Egyptian bondage. They have been oppressed. They have been put upon. They have been treated like slaves and been abused and mistreated. And yet now God has sent a great deliverer in Moses. And as Moses has come there with his brother Aaron, and he has declared to Pharaoh, let my people go, Pharaoh has refused and refused and refused, and God has hardened his heart because he has kept refusing of his own free will choice. As his heart has become hardened, everything that they have tried, Pharaoh has rejected, and every time they've tried to reach him, Pharaoh's rejected it. And now finally, they're getting ready for one final plague upon the land. One final plague upon the people of Egypt that will finally bring forth a deliverance of God's people. This is the context of our passage of Scripture. So I'm going to put down Egyptian bondage, right? That's our context. That's Egyptian bondage. Egyptian bondage is taking place. Moses is now hearing instruction because did you notice as Jim was reading, he said, and the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron. The Lord wants everyone to be clear on this. The institution of this feast is not something that Moses and Aaron got together and said, ooh, man, I know, we all love thee. Why don't we kind of slip this into our part of worship and then we can just do it legitimately, right? No. This is God's idea. This is God's institution and God's giving of direction. So make sure we're all on the same page here. The Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron. And did you notice that this is such an important event that it changes the construct of how the Israelites, I started to say manage, but look at time. Because did you notice when Jim was reading verse 2, it said there, the month shall be unto you the beginning of months. All right. So now, this is going to be in what you'd call the first month of the Israelite calendar, Abib or Nisan. Previously, the Jews looked at a month called Tisri, which was about October, when the autumn equinox happened. That was the origin of their first month of their calendar. But now this is such a big event, God is saying, no, now we're going to change things. Now, this is going to be your first month, Abib or Nisan. This is going to be what we start looking at a construct of time. And this is when I want you to institute this feast, this event, this monumental memorial unto me. So the first month of the year to you, Abib or Nisan. Previously, Tisri in October. Oh, by the way, this would be like our March or our April. All right? So Abib and Nisan would be like our March or our April for the Jews. They're going to call it Abib or Nisan, and it's going to be the first month of their calendar or their construct of looking at time now. So God's giving this. Egyptian bondage is taking place. They're about to be delivered, but yet now God's giving instructions about this observance. All right, let's start looking at verse 3 there. Jim, you got that still? All right, go ahead then, brother.
Speak ye unto all the congregations of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for an house.
Go ahead, brother. Go ahead on verse 4.
And if the household be too little for the lamb, let him in his neighborhood next unto his house take it accordingly to the number of the souls. Every man accordingly to his eating shall make your count for the lamb.
All right. So still looking at timing, right? We got the context. We got the timing, first month of the Jewish calendar. Now we need to understand that on the 10th day of that first month, right? 10th day of that first month, they're supposed to select a lamb. As they select that lamb, then they're supposed to put it up, right? So Nisan or Abib the 10th, to select the lamb, put it up. But then what day did Jim say that they're actually going to sacrifice? It wasn't the 10th, right? They're going to keep it up for a couple days. Anybody catch what day they're actually going to do the feasting and the sacrificing and the recognizing? 14th. All right, so the 10th, they're going to select it. 14th day is when they're going to actually do the, and maybe Jim missed, maybe I didn't catch that. That's going to be a verse here in a minute. But anyway, 10th is when they select it. 14th is when they're actually going to sacrifice and have the feast. You say, well, why is there a period of days in between this? Because as you're going to see, this lamb is supposed to be perfect. This lamb is supposed to be without spot or blemish. So if they keep it up for a couple of days, it gives them the opportunity to observe that lamb, to make sure it's not lame, to make sure it doesn't have any health or ailment issues. Now they have that opportunity to make sure that as God is saying that this is a lamb, and let's just read that a little bit. Verse 5, your lamb shall be without blemish. A male of the first year, ye shall take it out from the sheep or from the goats, and ye shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. So each house is supposed to have a lamb, right? A male lamb, right? Notice that. So a male lamb without spot or blemish. So perfect, right? Without spot or blemish. If your household is too small for a lamb, then you are to go in with your neighbor and as according to your person, sacrifice a lamb. From the 10th to the 14th, it's kept up, it's observed, it's looked, yep, no health issues, no ailments, it's perfect. 14th, by the time it rolls around, then that is the time of sacrifice. And in the evening, all of Israel was supposed to do this. Each household sacrificed that Passover lamb. Now, verse 7. And they shall take of the blood and strike it on the two side posts and on the upper doorposts of the houses, wherein they shall eat it. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. So, now, what does this Passover feast, now you're thinking feast, I'm sure you're thinking like me when I think of feast like cakes and pies and, all those good things. Well, I didn't see a cake or a pie in that menu. But did anybody catch what the menu consisted of? Well, you know it's a lamb, right? But what else? Unleavened bread. Okay, unleavened bread. Thank you, Ms. Laura. Anything else?
Bitter herbs.
Thank you, Jim. All right, bitter herbs. Is that H-E-R-B? All right, so three main elements mentioned here. You're going to see in a moment, all right, not now, but I'm going to go ahead and jot it up here just because we're talking about the menu, okay? In a moment, you're going to see where there was something else kind of added in time, and that was going to be fruit of the vine. Okay? So you'll see that in a minute where that comes into play. Right now, as we're looking at this, you're seeing, okay, so they got that lamb. They're supposed to roast it. Well, after they kill it, they take the blood and they put it on their doorpost. So get the picture of the doorpost, right? The door frame. So now you're going to have blood here, and you're going to have blood here, and you're going to have blood here, right? Isn't that cool, right? So now they've got it over. And remember, each family's supposed to do this. So now each family within that house is covered by the blood, right? Covered by the blood. They're covered by the blood. They have this meal. It is the lamb that is roasted. It is the unleavened bread, and it is the bitter herbs. Now, what does all this mean? Well, the bitter herbs was supposed to represent the what? The bitterness of the Egyptian bondage they've been in. It's supposed to make them remember that. Because remember, this Passover feast is going to go down throughout the ages for the people of Israel. The people at that time, they know the Egyptian bondage quite well. But what about those hundreds of years afterwards? That bitter herbs were supposed to remind them of the bitterness of the bondage their forefathers endured in Egypt. Well, what about that unleavened bread? Well, in a minute, you're going to see that they were supposed to eat this in haste, quickly, right? You ain't got time for the bread to rise, and plus it don't have any leaven in it. So you're going to eat it unleavened for the haste. Yeah, but it's going to represent something else here in a minute, and who that's going to be is, you probably already know it, but anyway, Jesus the Christ. The lamb, of course, again, as you're eating that lamb, that Passover lamb, that male without spot or blemish, you're saying, well, what was that lamb supposed to make them think of? Well, again, you're going to see it, the Messiah, the Redeemer, and then the fruit of the vine that's going to be added later. And you say, well, when was that? If it's not here in Exodus, when did that come about? A lot of people think that it came about after a number of years had passed. They had already got probably perhaps in the promised land, land of plenty. And rather than having to be something that was hastily done and quickly, then they had an opportunity to eat it in a reclining or sitting position. Because what you're going to see here in a moment is that as they're eating this, they're supposed to eat it with their shoes on, which for the Jewish people, eating it with the shoes on in their house, that was a no-go, but here they're supposed to. And they're supposed to have their clothes on, their staff in their hand, ready to go, right? Because what's about to happen, remember the context, God's about to bring death upon the land. And as soon as those Egyptians say, get out, we're done with you, get away from us, they need to be ready to go right then. Not, hold on, give us a time to pack. Be ready. So they're supposed to eat this meal in haste. And well, let's see that. Eat not it, verse 8. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Eat not of it raw, nor sodden it all with water, but roast with fire, his head with his legs, and with the purtenance thereof. That's like his entrails or his innards. And ye shall let nothing of it remain until the morning. And that which remaineth of it until the morning ye shall burn with fire. And thus shall ye eat it with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand. And ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt. One more. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and ye shall keep it a feast to the Lord. Throughout your generations ye shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. So was there any cessation or a point where this was supposed to stop being observed as a people? No. Because remember, God is wanting them to remember this deliverance. This time when he went through the land and he smote the firstborn and he brought deliverance from that bitter Egyptian bondage. So they're supposed to remember this. Here's the elements. They're supposed to eat it in a hasty, staff in hand, shoes on feet, ready to go. And then, what is the purpose as a memorial? For them to remember, right? For them to remember and think back. A memorial, whenever you think of a memorial, ultimately it is a memory or something to cause to remember. And so this is a memorial feast, a memorial observance. You say, okay, well, that's the Passover, and that happened. Let me see where I'm trying to see where I can write all this at. So that's the 14th, right? 14th of Abib, or Nisan. But Brother Raines, over here it says Passover - Feast of Unleavened Bread. Yeah, it does. A lot of times, due to their proximity on the calendar, you can see them stated almost as synonyms, right? They're not. They're actually two different observances. But what you have is on the 14th, you have Passover the very next day. So 15th is the very first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And as you have that Feast of Unleavened Bread, remember how many we're fixing to see it. I'm going to go. All right. So 7. Just 7 days. All right. And that's going to make sense here in a minute, all right? So we've got the Passover. Let's look at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then we'll put it all together. We'll unpack it all together and see as New Testament Christians why it's so important that we have a good handle on this. All right, last couple verses of verse 20. We're not going to read the entire chapter, but we are going to look at the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Jim, will you start that verse 15 for us? Oh, go ahead, Laura.
Shall ye eat unleavened bread? Even the first day ye shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eateth leavened bread from the first day until the seventh day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel.
All right, and go ahead and do 16 too.
And in the first day there shall be a holy convocation, and in the seventh day there shall be an holy convocation to you. No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you.
All right, so this Feast of Unleavened Bread, they were supposed to have already gone through their houses and rid the houses of any leaven, right? No leaven whatsoever in the house. At this point, it should have already been cleaned out, gotten rid of, removed from the house. It is a type of sin, so get rid of it. Get it out the house. After they've done so, now they do the Passover. And next day, immediately after, they begin this Feast of Unleavened Bread. As you were reading, or as Miss Lori was reading, you heard her say the first day and that last day are holy convocations. A convocation is an assembly, a holy day. There is to be no work whatsoever done on that day unless it's meal preparation. She read it, right? Unless it's meal preparation, you're not to do it. A holy convocation, assemble together, no work, high and holy day for the people of Israel. So that's the first day, and that's the last day. Now, you've got the 14th, which was Passover. You're going to have this week of unleavened bread immediately after. So you got 8 days in which you're going to be feasting and observing. For the people of Israel, a lot of times you'll see in the scripture, you'll say, well, they were observing the unleavened bread. Well, yeah, that's true. But immediately prior to that, they had to have observed the Passover to get to the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So now we get the setting for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. 7 days, you're eating unleavened bread. That's what you're supposed to eat. You're not supposed to do any work on the first or the last day. It's a holy convocation, and it's a memorial as well. But let's keep reading. And ye shall observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread, for in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall ye observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at even, ye shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at even. 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses. For whosoever eateth that which is leavened, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a stranger or born in the land. Ye shall eat nothing leavened, and all your habitations shall ye eat unleavened bread. So the only thing they were supposed to be eating during all this thing was what? Unleavened bread. Convocations, yes, first and last, no work, right? No work except meal preparation. And then punishment. Did anybody notice, was there a punishment if you didn't observe this? Was there a punishment if you said, well, I can't handle eating unleavened bread 7 days, I need some ice cream, right? Was there a punishment for anything of that nature? All right, so expulsion, right? You're not going to be a part of us if you refuse to honor God and heed his word and do this observance. So, oh, and by the way, did you notice how long this was supposed to be a feast or an observance as well? Forever. So this isn't an and or maybe we can do it this year, but no, we don't got to worry about it next year. No. This was supposed to be a perpetual feast and a perpetual observance, Feast of Unleavened Bread, Passover feast, kind of all crammed in there together, an 8-day total observance, 14th Passover, 15th through 21st, Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now, and I'm going to say kicked out, right? Boom, done. You say, again, Brother Raines, this is kind of pretty cool history for God's people and history of Israel and history of this feast. Bring it home for us, New Testament Christians, right? Bring it home for us, New Testament Christians. I would like somebody, if you have the opportunity, to go ahead and please turn to 1 Corinthians 5 and 7, and you're going to read it out loud for us so that we see how applicable or why this is so important for us. 1 Corinthians 5 and 7. When you get there, make sure Jesse's got it. Miss Lori, let me see that microphone, and I'll give that over there to him. All right, Jesse, when you read it nice and loud so that we can all hear it, and even the folks on the internet can hear it.
Purge out therefore the old leaven, that ye may be a new lump, as ye are unleavened. For even Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us.
Even Christ our what?
Passover.
Christ our what?
Passover.
Passover. Christ our Passover. Paul's writing to New Testament saved believers in Jesus Christ, and he's saying Christ is our Passover. The people of Israel had a Passover lamb, but Jesus is our Passover. Anybody remember in Peter when Peter was talking about Jesus and he's trying to describe the holiness and the purity and the awesomeness of Jesus? He says Jesus was like a what? Anybody remember? A lamb without spot or blemish. Why on earth did Peter use that imagery? Because remember, he is a Jew. And he knows it's pointing right on back to the Passover. He is a Jewish writer, and he's writing, and he knows that Jesus was that Passover lamb without spot, without blemish, perfect in every way. And oh, by the way, as we were looking at Jesus, now that we're realizing, oh, he is our Passover, did you notice that when they were eating that lamb, and as we were reading through that, in chapter 12, 1 through 20, were they supposed to eat in the entirety of that lamb? Use every bit of it? Well, everything but the guts, right? So all of it, right? I want you to think about Jesus. When he went to the cross of Calvary, what did he give on that cross? He gave all. He paid it all. He gave his all, right? He went to that cross of Calvary. He was broken, bruised, and bloody for our sin debt. Remember, he is our what, Jesse? He is our Passover. So without spot or blemish, giving his all. And oh, by the way, we talked about this unleavened bread in the New Testament as he's teaching, and he's talking about, in the Old Testament you guys had manna, but there is a bread come down from heaven. He is that unleavened bread, right? Without sin, without spot, without blemish. So now you're getting a fuller picture. Jesus, who came as our lamb without spot or blemish to pay our sin debt, to give it all on the cross of Calvary so that we might have redemption. And I want you to think about that. Here we see the sacrifice of Jesus, right? Like just that lamb was sacrificed. And oh, by the way, have you ever thought about this? Remember that door? Man, I should have been an art major, right? Man, look at that door, right? And we said the blood was, well, let me just get my red marker. We said the blood was over here, and we said the blood was over here, and we said the blood was over here, right? That's what the Lord told them, right? He said, hey, you take that blood and you strike it on the two side posts and on the upper door post. Jesus said it. I mean, the Lord Lord told Moses that's what you do. Did you ever notice? Ever notice that? Oh, there's a cross, right? Because remember, this is pointing to Jesus, right? Yes, they're looking at it and they're remembering the deliverance from Egyptian bondage, but Jesus delivered from the bondage of sin. Jesus delivers all mankind from that bondage of sin because he broke the chains on Calvary's cross. So now remember, it's all kind of, okay, yes, I can kind of get an idea of why it was so important for the Jews and why it was so important for them to remember it, and God is telling them to remember it, and it's remembering the freedom they have from Egypt. Oh, man, it's pointing to Jesus and the freedom he gives as well. He's the lamb without spot or blemish. He paid it all. We can see the cross there in the very part of it. And, oh, by the way, I want you to remember something else about this Jesus. What did the Lord say in this passage of Scripture, Exodus chapter 12? When we got down to verse 12 and verse 13, right? Chapter 12, Exodus, verse 12 and 13, he's saying, I'm going to pass through Egypt tonight, and I'm going to strike all the firstborn. Yep, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to execute judgment. And then when he got into verse 13, he said what? Anybody remember verse 13? You got it handy there? When I see the blood, I will pass over you. So that house will not endure my judgment because I see the covering, atoning blood. This isn't hard to draw the parallel to Jesus, right? When you accept his sacrifice by grace through faith, you're then washed in the blood of the Lamb. And since you've been washed in the blood of the Lamb, God, when he sees the blood, he passes by you in judgment because now you've been redeemed. Now you have become a child of his. Now you are washed and made whole. right? When I see the blood, I will pass over, right? It's all pointing to Jesus and what he did on Calvary, right? Isn't it amazing that we're looking at the Old Testament law, right, that they were so hung up on, and yet in one of its main feasts of observance, all you see is Jesus, right? It's pretty cool. And oh, by the way, as we're looking at New Testament, and we're looking at all these different ties to Jesus, remember how in the New Testament, right before he goes to the cross of Calvary, remember he's our Passover lamb. Jesus is there with his disciples, and he sends some of them on ahead, and he says, I want you to go and find us a room and prepare that room so that we can observe something. Anybody remember what it was he wanted to observe with his disciples before he went to the cross of Calvary? It was the Passover, right? He wanted to go and observe, and he says, y'all go find me a room there, because remember, as they're observing that feast, immediately after they eat that feast, and he says, Judas, you go on, do what you're going to have to do, dismiss. After Judas leaves, then he institutes what? The Lord's Supper. And as he institutes the Lord's Supper, what does he have there readily available? Well, he's got these elements. And oh, by the way, look at the two elements that are in the Lord's Supper. And the unleavened bread. Now, again, added probably later during the Promised Land. And by the way, when you saw Jesus and them observing that supper, remember, as I said, here in the Old Testament, they had to eat it in haste. By this time, remember, the one whom Jesus loved was leaning close to him. They could eat sitting and reclining by then. All right, certain nuances had evolved or changed, but nothing about the meaning had changed. The unleavened bread and the fruit of the vine, which he had readily available, was what he took and then instituted the Lord's Supper with. The unleavened bread to, of course, represent his sinless body, the fruit of the vine, the blood, sinless, shed on Calvary. Isn't that amazing? Oh, by the way, one more little nugget, right? If you're looking at Jesus, since we just love us some Jesus, because, man, he saved us from our sin. Remember how after he was crucified and he, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit, right? Died. Right after he died, not long afterwards, they were in a big rush. And they were in a big hurry. Man, we got to hurry. We got to get him down. Is he dead? Is he dead? Check him. Yeah. We're not going to break his legs. Throw a spear into his side. Yep. Okay. Yeah, he's dead. All right. Hurry up and get him down. We got to get him in the tomb. We got to hurry. We got to hurry. Anybody remember why all the haste now? Well, remember, Jim, Passover's 14. What's the very next day? Is the 15th, which is a what? Miss Lori read it. No work to be done on that day unless it's meal preparation. So they're in a hurry. We got to get him in a tomb. We got to get him buried. We got to do something. Hurry. It's about to be the 15th and no work can be done. Boom, borrowed tomb, right? All this stuff starts coming together now. When you start looking at the New Testament, you start seeing Jesus shown out, but you also start seeing in the Gospels all of these nuggets coming to, that's why they were, that's what they were eating when Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper. That's why he's our Passover lamb, because now you have a fuller, richer understanding of the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. All right. So our first feast is now complete. Any questions, comments about the Passover Feast of Unleavened Bread? Go ahead, Jim. Bitter herbs. Oh, I'm glad you said it real quick, Jim. The bitter herbs, remember how they're talking about he who I give the sop and dippeth it? That bitter herb was almost like a sauce. Like they could dip that bread or that sop into, right? And remember what Jesus said? He whom I giveth, right? And who did he give it to? Judas, right? Oh, why did they have a sauce of bitter herbs there? Passover feast, right? Well, Judas, he gave the sop to. That sop was some of that bread they'd been eating with, and that bitter herb was like that sauce, almost. But you had a question about the bitter herbs?
Yeah, no, that's what I was wondering. Maybe why that fell off then from that we just have the unleavened bread and the fruit of the vine.
Why Jesus didn't incorporate it as part of the Lord's Supper? Yes. Because remember that, that's a question we may have to ask him when we see him in heaven, because ultimately when he instituted, you had the unleavened bread for his body, fruit of the vine for his blood. could he have incorporated the bitterness to show the bitterness of what he went through on the cross? He could have, but he didn't choose to. So at this time, what about the lamb? Why wasn't it? For whatever intent, he instituted the Lord's Supper with the bread and the vine, and we go with God's prerogative and sovereignty. So, any other questions, comments? All right, Lord willing, next week, if we have the opportunity, we've already got the Feast of Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Hopefully next week we'll start conquering or looking at Pentecost, right? Feast of Weeks, Feast of First Fruits. Why is it called Feast of Weeks? Why is it called? Sometimes you see it in Scripture as Feast of First Fruits. If they're synonymous, or they're both talking about the same feast. And what is this Pentecost? Because I thought that was in the book of Acts. Right? I thought that was when the church got empowered. So why is it a feast too? Well, like I said, this Old Testament teaching will give you a richer understanding of that New Testament teaching as well. All right, appreciate